And so I am delighted to invite KSHAMTA HUNTER. KSHAMTA is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Education, Curriculum and Pedagogy, where she is investigating the role of social innovation and youth activism in achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda. She also leads student engagement programming for the UBC Sustainability Initiative. And today, KSHAMTA will discuss: how will COVID-19 affect the global Sustainable Development Agenda? And KSHAMTA, I invite you to take over the screen.
All right, Aideen, do you see that?
I do. I see your first slide, KSHAMTA. You're ready to go.
Great, thank you. And thank you for Aideen for that introduction, and I welcome everyone. It's great to be here. I'm sorry that I won't be able to interact with you as much as I usually do during my presentations. I'm new to this lecturing bit. I usually do a more interactive session where I don't have to talk too much. However, I'm looking forward to receiving your questions at the end of the presentation. I would be happy to connect one-on-one if you're interested in continuing this conversation. A disclaimer, although that my work and study revolves around sustainability learning and education, I'm by no means an expert in the Global Sustainable Development Agenda or the COVID-19 impacts on these goals. But hopefully with this session, I'm hoping to engage you in this conversation and learn together as we go through this pandemic. Let me just figure out my slides here. There we go. All right, I would, before we begin, like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territory of the Musqueam people, or the UBC is where I work and learn. And I would also like to acknowledge that you are possibly joining us from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. I also like to acknowledge and think of those who are struggling the most in this crisis. So far, worldwide, we have over 5 million cases of COVID-19 and over 300,000 deaths. In Canada, we have just over 80,000 cases, and over 6,000 deaths. So I'm thinking about all those who have been really impacted by this as well today. So before we dive into today's topic, I wonder if you would join me in a little bit of a focus or a grounding exercise. If you have a paper and a writing utensil, please grab that. If you don't, it's okay. You can do this mentally as well. So this activity is called a spiral journal activity. And if you have a paper, if you have a paper, if you can divide that into 4 quadrants, just like in this image. And start drawing the most tight small spiral and right in the middle of the page. As you're drawing that, I will give you 4 prompts. You can respond to each prompt in one of the quadrants as we go along. And I'll give you about perhaps maybe 10 to 15 seconds for each prompt. And we're not gonna share or anything like that. This is just for yourself as a grounding activity. So what are your expectations from this session? How are you feeling right now? What worries you the most about this pandemic? And the last one is, what keeps you hopeful and motivated? All right, so that was just a, like I said, the focus or a grounding activity for you to kind of know where you're at as we are diving into this, this topic today. So here's a, agenda that we will look at today. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will cover a bit of what they are, a bit of a background on them, and why do we need them. And then we will dive a little bit more into how they're being impacted through this pandemic. I will also share some resources at the end. So if you're interested in learning more and diving into this topic, you can do so at your own time. And then we'll open up to questions. So before we dive into the Agenda 2030, as it's also known as, so sustainable development, it was defined in 1987 by Brundtland in a document called Our Common Goal, released by the United Nations. And in that document, it is the most popular and common definition still being used today. Sustainable development is defined as a development that is meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it's still a very common definition being used. In 2015, the UN went through a largest consultation worldwide over 3 years to come up with Agenda 2030. And it's really a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. 193 countries have signed up on this Agenda 2030. And what it is, it's really a collection of 17 goals. Here they are. These are 17, maybe this one is better. 17 goals, and they come with each one of them come with their own targets and indicators. There are 169 targets and 232 indicators. And then I will show you another slide that gives you a better idea of what these targets and indicators look like. So I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of what these SDGs are and what are some of the key characteristics that define them. So one of the key things about these goals is that it's universality. So they are universal, meaning they apply to every country equally, including developing and developed nations, so including Canada and US and some of the European countries. It applies to both rich and poor countries, cities and villages, all ages and all genders. Countries can also report their progress, but it is voluntary. And Canada, they are called voluntary national reviews. Canada just went through one in 2018. They are indivisible, meaning that their goals are interconnected. So achievement of one goal really depends on the achievement of the others. So it's like a puzzle. If one piece is missing, you can't really complete the puzzle. So for example, poverty, which is goal 1, can lead to hunger and malnutrition, which is goal 2, which may lead to health problems, which is goal 3, and may prevent children from completing their education, which is goal 4, or adults from getting a job, which is goal 8. So as you can see that they are very interconnected. They are transformative, meaning that there needs to be a move past business as usual. They seek transformative and innovative solutions, changing how we think about money, growth, and profit. It really calls for a new understanding of prosperity and what that looks like. The goals really see the economic well-being, socialized inclusion, and environmental sustainability as closely interconnected. Leaving no one behind. Really, the success of all of this depends on inclusion of the poorest and most vulnerable population. I also cannot help but notice the similarities of these characteristics to the pandemic that we are going through. The COVID-19 is also universal, transformative, needs transformative solutions, and it's leaving no one behind. So there's a lot of overlap with these characteristics and the pandemic that we are going through right now. Another way of looking at these is through the what's called the 5P lens. So they're categorized into these 5 buckets: people, prosperity, peace, partnerships, and planet. And how they are put into these buckets, I will cover in one of the slides later on. Another way of looking at it also is through the 3 economy, society, and environment lens. It's called the donut diagram, and it kind of really situates these goals into these three lenses that we usually look at sustainability. So the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, are robust and detailed. Like I said, there are 169 targets. There are over 200 indicators. Some of these targets and indicators are fairly well defined, and some are not. So for example, target 1.2 related to poverty says reduce poverty by at least 50% is a measurable goal, compared to target 2.4, which basically says sustainable food production and resilient agricultural practices, not necessarily measurable. So there still needs to be some work done around some of these targets and goals. That is still work in progress. And each country can look at their own indicators and how they are going to define those or measure those as well. So this is a diagram that captures really well the 17 goals and the indicators that are associated with them. The green ones really indicate that there is data available that is measurable. So there is some kind of measurable data that's available, so we can see and progress through those targets and indicators. The yellow says that there is some incomplete or outdated data that's available, and red is that there is currently no available data whatsoever. So global monitoring is needed. I would quickly mention that there are some obvious weaknesses and criticisms to this framework or these goals. And some of them are that it's focused too much on the environment, and that it applies only to developing countries, although that there is argument that there's not. For example, water issues still exist in developed nations, even in Canada. There's clean water supply shortages in northern Indigenous communities, for example. So it does apply really well to both developing and developed nations or countries. Another one is that it's a UN top-down plan, and that there are not enough resources to achieve these goals, or that it is unrealistic. Another one is that it is human-centric or ethnocentric, and that there is the biggest one is actually that there is no accountability, that countries are free to sign in, but they don't necessarily have to show how they are progressing to achieve these goals. Although the goals might not be perfect, I feel like that they are our best hope to achieve a world that we want to live in by 2030. The fact that it is a product of a three-year consultation exercise, where these goals were from 300. They started from 300 goals, and they have narrowed it down to 17. The government, businesses, communities, universities, NGOs, and youth, they all are across the world have participated in these negotiations, and with more than 7 million people voting in 84 national surveys across the globe. So the fact that there's 193 countries have signed up to it, it's hard enough to convince a handful of people to decide on something. So it is a framework that really gives us a common language to proceed as we go through this pandemic, or in general, how we want to proceed as humanity. In terms of why they are needed, I wanted to kind of mention that human societies are causing more damage than ever to the planet and environment, and that's not a news to any one of you. Inequality among countries is increasing. Divide between the rich and poor is increasing. Jobs as we know it may not exist in the next few years. So the education system has been struggling with that. The governance is becoming more complex, especially in the growing influence of technology. We are getting closer to eradicating extreme poverty, but we still have a lot of work to do. The fact that 8 richest men in the world own 50% of the global wealth is really something to think about. So how can we distribute that wealth across and really think about the most vulnerable in our societies? So diving, and this is just a chart that shows the poverty lines in the world here, and it is decreasing, but we still, like I said, we still have a lot of work to do. So the impacts on the SDGs. I will go through all of the goals, all the 17 goals in a bit. But before that, I wanted to kind of touch on the 3 main aspects of economic, social, and environmental areas, and how they are being impacted. So as you would know or heard about, high-income countries are releasing bold stimulus packages to tackle with the pandemic, while emerging economies or developing countries are struggling to keep up with the pandemic. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, projected global growth to fall to -3% this year, making it the worst recession since the Great Depression, and much worse than the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Which is really testing our planetary boundaries, which is this idea of environmental limits within which humanity can safely operate. The social impacts. So this economic inequality has led us to most vulnerable being impacted the most, like I said, with job losses on one hand, and on the other, certain vulnerable groups such as women are being really impacted with increase in violence against women at home. And it really goes to show the environmental racism, which is disproportionate impacts on the most vulnerable. And this pandemic is really showing that, including the locations of industrial polluters such as landfills and trash incinerators or coal plants, toxic waste facilities, and other environmentally hazardous activities near the communities of color and working poor, which increases the chance of the pandemics and diseases. And although we are seeing cuts in the carbon emissions and giving us clean air in Beijing or Delhi kind of places, this trend is temporary until we open our economies and we get back to our normal ways of doing things. While we still dealing with the pandemic and our socializing aspect of it, increasing our single-use items, including PPE and sanitation equipment, which will cause more waste. And something called the cascading shocks, which is a domino-like changes in social and political systems as a result of a tipping event like COVID-19. So we need to be keeping all of that in context. So this is a kind of really good graphic of how these SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, are being impacted due to this COVID-19. It was released in a UN paper recently in March 2020. It does not, however, cover all 17 goals. So I kind of went through all 17 of them and have created this. I don't know if you can read them really well, but I will go through each one of them a little bit as you're looking into the slide. So in terms of poverty, like I said, the most vulnerable are being impacted because of the loss of income in the segments of the society and families that fall below the poverty line. And the small and medium enterprises and self-employed and daily wage earners are hit the hardest. The second one, food production and distribution is disrupted, combined with countries with market tampering and stockpiling, is starting to impact the prices of food with effects on nutrition of the most vulnerable. The third one, the good health and well-being, having devastating health impacts on the most vulnerable, again, mostly the elderly, the poor, and the low or wage income population. Education, in the education sector, 166 countries have implemented countrywide school and university closures. More than 1.52 billion children and youth are currently out of school or university, representing 87% of the world enrolled school and university student population. In addition, nearly 60 million teachers are no longer in the classroom. The World Food Program estimates that more than 320 million primary school children in 120 countries are now missing out of school meals. Again, related to education, remote learning is not accessible for many, and sustained disruption of education could lead to a rise in child labor and child marriage. Number 5, gender equality. The fact that women make up 70% of the global health workforce puts them at higher risk. We are also seeing spikes in domestic violence as well across the globe. Clean water and sanitation, supply disruption and inadequate access to clean water hinder access to clean hand washing facilities, one of the most important COVID-19 prevention measures. And we are seeing that the estimates that we are hearing show that 3 billion people are without basic hand washing facilities at home, and about 4 billion people lack any kind of social protection. Number 7, affordable and clean energy supply and personal shortages are leading to disrupted access to electricity, further weakening the health system response and capacity. Increased demand in electricity at homes, because now we are all staying at home and using Wi-Fi's, may not be fulfilled by clean energy sector as is. Decent work and economic growth, the supply chain disruption halting the manufacturing industry and falling commodity prices, especially in oil, further compound the economic impact of the pandemic. Economic activities are suspended, lower income or less work time, unemployment of certain occupations. There are 85 emerging and developing economies that have gone to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, for support. So that just shows the global impact of this pandemic. In terms of industry, innovation, and infrastructure, major financial markets are turning and international supply chains are in turmoil. All our capacity is currently invested in tackling the pandemic rather than putting resources toward innovation outside of the needs of the pandemic. So although the pandemic, we will need to innovate new ways within the pandemic sector, but other sectors such as education and infrastructure will struggle. Reduce inequalities, definitely heightened high levels of inequality within and between countries. For example, migrant account for almost 30% of the workers in some of the most affected sectors in the OECD countries, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Massive job losses among migrant workers will have knock-on effect on economies that are heavily dependent on remittances from such as El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras, Nepal. So there's a lot going on in those places. According to the International Telecommunications Unit, an estimated 3.6 billion people remain offline, with the majority of unconnected living in the least developed countries. In terms of sustainable cities and communities, homeless population may be unable to safely find shelter and are therefore have higher chances of exposure to the virus. Populations in slums face higher risk of exposure because of high density and poor sanitation conditions. Responsible consumption and production. It's the public health emergency and is a real-time experiment in downsizing the consumer economy. But at the same time, with this hoarding mentality, we might have an adverse effect as well as single-use or PPE increase. Climate action, like I said, there's a reduction in the climate, in the carbon emissions we are seeing and pollution because of less flight and less travel. But these are short-lived unless countries do deliver their commitment to use sustainable development as an opportunity to really think about our carbon emissions as we restart our economies. Life below water. So 90% of the world cargo moves by sea, and fish provide essential protein for 1 billion people globally. Offshore law enforcement gaps may lead to greater crimes, including pirates, poachers, and smugglers. A less secure ocean will be less managed and less able to sustainably provide resources like fish over long term. Legal industrial fishing operations are likely to decline, especially over the near term, from a combination of the risk at being at the sea in a pandemic and supply chain complications caused by market closures. COVID-19 outbreaks aboard fish vessels present a significant threat to public health. 50 million people are employed in marine fisheries, largely in developing countries with dismissal records on safety, health, and human rights. However, oceans can also provide answers to combat COVID-19 or other pandemics, like it has in the past. Bacteria, for example, found in the depths of the ocean can hold answers to detecting and testing some of those viruses. Life on land. We have lost 60% of all wildlife in the last 50 years. While the number of new infection diseases have quadrupled in the last 60 years. So definitely that's not a coincidence. There is a connection between destroying our land and increase in diseases. COVID-19 is a virus attributed to human interferences such as deforestation, encroachment, and animal habitats and biodiversity loss. Intact nature provides a buffer between humans and diseases, and emerging diseases are often the result of encroachment into natural ecosystems and changes in human activity. Deforested land has been linked to outbreaks of Ebola and Lyme disease, for example. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Our trust in the institution of a government and political leadership may be eroded due to their response to the crisis, and as a result of some groups being stigmatized or wrongly accused for being responsible for the diffusion of the virus. Impact of the COVID-19 is fragile political transitions and in countries already facing a rapid deterioration of security conditions on top of weak health systems and climate change. Number 17, the partnerships of the goals, for the goals. COVID has definitely magnified backlash against globalization, but also highlight the importance of international cooperation on public health. Only international cooperation can prevent a worst case scenario. A whole of society approach is needed. An effective response needs to be multidimensional, coordinated, swift, and decisive. So no individual country can do it alone. If anything, COVID-19 has demonstrated that no one can prosper alone. There is such a thing as society, and we are all part of it. Many people are wondering when life will get back to normal after the COVID. And I think there was an article that said we should be asking, can we use this opportunity to learn from our mistake and really build something better? And the common language of SDGs can provide that medium for us to move forward as we see these opportunities arise. So I leave you with this opportunity for change in terms of is really COVID-19 offering us the opportunity to learn from our mistakes, change our behavior, and build something better. Leave you with these resources. The BCCIC movement map is really good in terms of finding organizations that are working on these SDGs. SDG Academy offers a lot of great resources in terms of workshops on various SDGs related issues. And the World's Largest Lesson is another really good data bank. The THE, which is the Times Higher Education ranking, universities ranking. The UBC participates in this ranking as well, and we were ranked 7th globally in terms of how we are achieving these SDGs, which we are very proud of. So I think UBC is doing really well, but we still need to do a lot. So I will end there, and happy to take questions and connect if interested.
Thank you, Shamta. So I'll move over to the question and answer platform. And just to remind our participants today, the platform is slido.com and the code is EXL521. And I'll just take a moment to move over to the platform. And I did get a message from a participant that they couldn't see the slides, but I hope as we move through the slides, the script on your slide became larger. So I'm hoping that answered or response to that person's concern. Right now, so I'm just going to read out the question, Shamta, and giving you a moment to think about it. The questions are starting to come in. So do you think that the SD goals will be adjusted due to COVID?
Yeah, that's a question that a lot of experts are asking as well. How do we change the goals itself, but also the timeline for achievement of these goals? Maybe 2030 is not that far away, and especially with this pandemic, everything is slowing down. Especially the funding that's coming to sustainability projects. As I see it, these goals were meant to provide a kind of a roadmap and as a society, how we want to move towards 2030. So I'm not sure if the goals themselves need changing. Perhaps how we want to achieve them might change. And I think that's what we need to look at rather than changing the goals itself, because the goals, as you see it, they are very, they were left vague for a reason, or very broad for a reason, so that every country and city can relate to them and make their own pathway moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Shamta, do you have an idea of what is the world's largest lesson?
Yeah, it's a really good website. If you just Google World Largest Lesson, it's an amazing kind of a bank of lessons that folks all across the globe are sending their lessons to, that are related to the SDGs. So teachers can use this as a bank. Any instructors across the globe can use it. So they're actually lesson plans. So it really tells you exactly how to deliver that topic or lesson. So I would like to let you explore that by yourself. It's a really good bank.
Okay, And sorry, where did you say that could be found, Shamta?
Just Google world largest lesson, and
Google World.
actually, or if you like, I can look it up.
That's okay. I think we caught it on the recording, so.
Did I think it was in the slide.
Okay.
In my slide there, I think there was a link.
Okay. Shamta, what are some of the small things on a daily basis that we can do now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think a lot of the things that this pandemic is forcing us to do is really the exact things that we need to be doing, because we are really cutting down our carbon emissions. A lot of the folks like myself don't really need to go to work and drive and get to work every day. If we can work from home, so really, I think this pandemic is really showing us that the things that we really need to do these things in this way. Can we change for good, for long term, instead of just this short period of time? Small things that you can do. What I do is, and what I find really very interesting and important is education. Really talking to more and more people about these issues, educating my kids, so that they can talk to their kids, and kids talk to their parents, and really they are the ones that are educating their parents. Starting your own garden in the backyard if you can, composting, turning off the lights, like small things that you can do. Definitely all the things that you can do at your home, do it. But really, if you want to do bigger changes, I would say, connecting with your politicians and doing some kind of a policy change, and really asking your local councillors or mayors, writing to them and asking them what they are doing about this crisis and the climate crisis that we are in, that is not going away anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. I was very sad to see the return of the plastic bags. Hopefully we can move away from that at some stage soon.
Yeah.
Shamta, will economic and environment losses lead to a surge in human migration after the pandemic?
Yes, I think to a certain extent we are seeing that. The California fires, for example, in the last few years, have definitely started making that shift. Although in US, it's also the political environment that's making people leave too. So yes, I think so. However, migration can only happen to a certain extent. Countries will at some point start closing their doors. And I think we really need to be thinking more as a society, as a global society, rather than as a country or a city. In this pandemic, that's one of the things that we are thinking about. How do we close enough so that we don't get more infection coming in? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like there are some really good opportunities that the pandemic is proposing, but then also some really things that we really need to stress and think about. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered that question.
That's fine. I mean, you bring to mind the recent cyclone where I think it's India, where they're moving people from out of the way, but they're congregating in large areas and they're doing their best to keep people safe. So it's a great question. Here's a comment from Claire. Thank you, Shamta, for your presentation. And then in your opinion, what are some of the ways that the UN could foster international cooperations to achieve these SDGs?
Yeah, I think UN is trying to increase or foster international cooperation, but really the UN, in my mind, doesn't have the authority to really say that you have to, these are the things that you have to do. So it's really up to the countries. And I think that is really the SDG framework as well. The way the framework was designed is that every country has an opportunity to take on their own way of targeting these goals. Yes, I think there are ways that they can foster international cooperation by bringing folks together and increasing this conversation and dialogue, which they are doing through COP conferences and high-level political forums. I do think that they need to open those forums to more younger like youth. So Canada does not have a youth delegation right now. The BCCIC is the one that's leading a youth delegation in Canada to these high-level political forums in the UN. But I think Canada should really step up and send our youth to these forums, because they really have the ideas on how to move forward, because it is all this crisis is going to impact them the most.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a sense at the moment, Shamta, how well the countries are cooperating within the UN, or is everybody just so distracted with COVID that not a lot is happening with regard to these at the moment?
I think currently, right now, everything is kind of on pause because of the pandemic. But there is international cooperation across SDGs. Like I mentioned, the voluntary national reviews are one way of countries showing and sharing how they are progressing and targeting these goals. So there is that, but there is a pause right now, hopefully temporarily.
Thank you. And so this person is asking, what do you think, Shamta, is the most important goal?
Oh, yeah, it's like asking a parent to choose between their kids.
Shamta's choice. Yeah.
Yeah, if I had to, I think they're all, like I said, they're all interlinked, interconnected. Yeah. You cannot really fully achieve one without addressing all the others. But I'm an educator. I am doing my PhD in curriculum and pedagogy. I feel education is really the foundation to build all of these goals on. So if I had to pick one, I think education is something that could really transform this framework and achieve these goals.
That makes sense. Do you think focus on these goals will get lost amidst efforts in returning to normal quickly?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes and no. I think there might be some things that will struggle as we go forward in opening our economies and going back to normal. But at the same time, these are the goals that we want to, as people, as humans, this is what we want to achieve. So I don't think the focus might shift temporarily, but I'm hopeful that will come back to these goals, and that we will go back to on track with these.
Okay, and I feel you answered the next question as well about what we can do as individuals. You hit on it small, what we can do, grassroots, and then larger. So I'll skip on to the next one. How are the timelines for less quantifiable goals structured? And second question to that, are these timelines expected to be delayed?
Yeah, so like I touched on earlier, I think UN is, and some of the countries are negotiating timelines, and is 2030 is really the one to achieve these goals by. The way these goals are set up and the framework, I mean, there's no way we will end poverty to completely by 2030. The targets are saying, what can we do? Can we reduce it by 50%? So I think that even though the timelines might be shifted, these goals are still very relevant. In terms of less quantifiable goals, those are the ones that will probably struggle the most in terms of shifting those timelines, because they are not as clear in terms of SMART goals or measurable. So I believe that these timelines, yes, they will shift. But at the same time, given the climate crisis that we are in, I think we do need to be doing something in order to survive and sustain life on Earth.
Thank you. And a helpful tip, probably related to what I just, when I started the questions and answers regarding viewing, Zoom ratio 100%. Thank you for that. So Shamta, what if governments stimulate fossil fuels when reopening the economy rather than renewable energy sources? And then can we pressure governments to stimulate sustainably?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a really tough one. I hope not, but there's definitely chances that as we are recovering through this pandemic, that we might do things to really sustain our economies and move forward in a more economy feasible way, I guess, not necessarily thinking about
Sustainable.
the
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
So. Uh, can we pressure government to stimulate green economy? Yes. The new Green Deal is something to look at, and how can we foster that? Um, like I said, I think as individuals, we can talk to people, increase our network, or develop our network of folks who are really interested in this, and then write to your local mayor or councilors to really take that policy action. That's the only way. The more they hear about it, the more it's on their heads to really bring up to their own groups. So I really urge you to do that if you can.
Because it is a valid concern, because this trillion of dollars that is being pumped into the economy, etc. It's like, you can only imagine that money that was put aside for green economy in the past may possibly not be there when we return. Great question. Do you think an officeless environment can be a possible new normal to support the goals of sustainability? Officeless.
Officeless environment.
No, I miss my colleagues.
Yes, I think there's a give and take, right? There's a social aspect to it, and then the work being done. So yes, I think officeless environment are possible, but it may not be for everyone. I think for folks like who are just sitting on their computers all day, and trust me, there are a lot of people at UBC who go to their office and sit at the computer all day.
Right.
Do they have to go into the office? No, of course not. But folks who are doing research, for example, and they have to go to the labs and use the equipment there and do their experiments. Yes, I think for them it will be hard to be in an officeless environment. So I think it's feasible. It's just not going to be reasonable for everyone.
And hopefully for people who have long travel commutes, hopefully this is a new direction for them that they will enjoy. KSHAMTA, what other goals could be added to the 17 already listed that could be assisting the SDGs? That's a great question.
Well, yeah, I think one of the key things that I've been hearing about, that not necessarily missing, but something that needs to be added, is Indigenous perspectives or Indigenous ways of living. And I think I don't know if that could be an extra goal to be added, or it should be a lens to look at all the goals. So that there are definitely certain things that we need to look at all the goals through. And in terms of adding extra goals, like I said, they started with 300 and they came down to 17.
Oh my goodness.
So, and even 17 is a lot for a lot of people.
Right.
Yes, I think a lot of people can come up with a lot of goals to add to this. But I think we need to be looking at what are our priorities as humanity, and how do we want to proceed through this. So Indigenous perspective is definitely something that comes to my mind, that needs to be more of a lens through which we look at the whole framework rather than adding it as a separate thing.
Okay, thank you. And there's a comment here, not sure if you wish to add to this, KSHAMTA, emphasis on pluralism to achieve the goals.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I don't know. Well, although it is 17, I mean, there are 17 goals, it's a lot of targets and a lot of indicators. I feel like as a whole, what we are trying to do is achieve a society that we want to be in. And I think these are the things that these are kind of almost like the building blocks of achieving that society. So even though that there are many, like I said, the interconnection between these really makes them one. And it's more like a puzzle rather than 17 goals
Right,
separately.
169 targets. World response to COVID started well in coordinating responses. The more distressing aspects of geopolitics is rising. Isolationism, espionage. Best response? Question mark?
Yeah, I hear you in that, and I think there is that mentality to kind of secure your own, or kind of protect your own. But like I said, international cooperation is really must. And we are seeing that in the health sector, of sharing equipment and sharing, and there's a lot of, from what I'm reading, a lot of coordination in terms of vaccines, and researchers sharing across the globe about what they are working on and how they are working on together. So I think that there is a lot of coordination going on, maybe not as much as we want, but yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to that.
Right. Thank you. What would be the first step in leading my community towards more sustainable ways, especially when government support is weak?
Yeah, I think if you are one of those people who likes to talk to their neighbors and like to initiate things, I would say, that's what I said at the very beginning, to talk to people. The more you talk to people about these issues, the more, and everybody wants to do something. It's just that sometimes they don't know where to begin or how to do it. So I think there are a lot of resources out there in terms of starting your own community project. And there are a lot of grants out there for these kind of community projects. If you like to connect with them, please let me know, and I can definitely pass you those resources. But yeah, I would say, if you can take matters in your own hands, this is the time. We are in climate crisis, and we need to be taking matters in our own hands.
Thank you. What kind of concerns are being asked of big corporations to decrease their manufacturing practices on climate/health to be more sustainable for our planet and our life?
Yeah, I'm, to be honest, I don't know too much about what big corporations and manufacturing practices are being asked to do in terms of sustainable practices. I do know that a lot of organizations and corporations are looking at sustainable practices, not necessarily just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it is a business case for them. A lot of these sustainable practices bring a lot of financial security for the organizations as well, and it has been proven over and over again. Especially the Sauder School of Business at UBC has been doing a lot of great work around that. But I'm not sure in terms of what are they being asked to do about more.
Right.
Not really familiar with that. Sorry.
Right. Maybe those big offices become homes now. The offices that may not be used. World to accept human diversity and pluralistic approach to solving the many problems. That statement, world to accept human diversity and pluralistic approach to solving the many problems. Do you have any comment on that at all before I move on to the next one?
Yes,
KSHAMTA?
no, I agree with that. 100%.
You agree? Great. Okay.
Yes.
When we return to normal, what does that mean regarding sustainability for health, planet, and life?
I think for us, I believe we really need to redefine what normal is. And I think, like I said in my presentation, this pandemic is really giving us an opportunity to redefine what our norm could look like. And what does it mean for sustainability of health and planet and life? And I think really that goes back to how we define normal. So like I said, if we don't have to go to the office, you know, that's saving a lot of trips. Like if 50% of people in Vancouver are not commuting every day, think about the carbon emissions that we are saving every day. So it's I think we need to not return to normal, but more define a new normal for us.
Okay. And then this participant is recommending a good documentary on war and plastics, showing economy going back to what is and not moving forward to decreasing unsustainable practices. What do you say on this? Have you seen it, Shamta?
I've heard about it. I've heard a lot of good things about it. Yeah, it's like I said, I haven't seen the movie, and I would rather not comment on hearsay about what
Sure.
I've heard.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So I will not comment on that. Sorry.
Well, certainly we can look at it ourselves. That's great. And this, the final question is 2 o'clock, so it's perfect timing. Thank you. Shamta, how can these 17 goals become interconnected globally to create access to basic human rights?
And I think that's what these goals are really getting to really have the most vulnerable being thought about as we're progressing through these goals. How can these be interconnected globally? They are already offered as an interconnected goal, as a framework. So like I said, how can they become more interconnected globally to access basic human rights? I think they also need to work really closely with the Human Rights Declaration, and I think that has come up quite a few times in my conversations with some experts. The UN DRIP in Canada and across the globe is something to be really looking at as well, about Indigenous human rights and human rights in general. So I think these frameworks need to work together, and they were created in a way that they should be working together in an interconnected way. So absolutely, but how is really up to each country to figure that out by themselves.
Okay, thank you. And I lied. There is one last question that that came in. How can the developing countries in Africa be assisted towards the 17 goals?
Yeah, I think with any developing country, especially Africa, they need developed countries like Canada and US and European countries really need to be helping, sharing technologies, sharing resources, sharing tools. And that's where the international cooperation comes in. And I think that's what we really need to look at and encourage developed countries to be contributing more towards the problem, towards solving the problem that they have mostly created.
Okay, great, thank you. And that's the last of the questions. I'm just going to move over to my last slide.
I hope I answered all the questions well, and I don't know if I have, but if not, I'm happy to connect with anyone to, like I said, to continue the conversation.
And so you mentioned that earlier, Shamta. How would it be possible for people to connect with you?
They can use my email at shamta.hunter@ubc.ca.
And that's SHAMTA.
KSHAMTA.
Yeah, of course, the K is silent. Yeah, .hunter@ubc.ca, or they can get the address through us either. And our contact information is info.exl@ubc.ca, or our phone number is 604-822-1444. Just want to remind people of upcoming lectures. We just have our final one next week, but do subscribe to our website, as I know my colleagues are making plans as we speak of upcoming lectures in the fall, perhaps before. And our recordings today, as with our others, will be on our YouTube website very, very soon. And so it just leaves me to say thank you very much, KSHAMTA, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it, and I appreciated the exercise in the beginning also. Thank you. And thank you again to our listeners for adding such value to the presentation with their questions. So just goodbye, everybody. Hope to see you soon and stay safe.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Aideen, and thanks, Dan.